The hot seat, a place that no coach wants to be. But unfortunately, the NFL brings high expectations. And these coaches absolutely deserve to be on the hot seat. These are the coaches that I think should be looking over their shoulder on whether or not they may have a job coming up soon. So I'm going to give you about 6 to 8 names that I feel are on the hottest of hottest seats in the AFC, the NFC, and across the NFL. You let me know in the live comment section which coaches you think belong on the hot seat. And if you want, mention a name that you would like to replace that coach. Okay, let's start it off with a couple of dishonorable mentions. 2 coaches that I think, based on their track record, based on their overall performance for their teams, they probably shouldn't be fired. They probably shouldn't be let go, but there's definitely conversation. So let's start it off with Zack Taylor of the Cincinnati Bengals. Zack Taylor is a quality football coach, at least based on his resume. Even last season, without Joe Burrow for about half the season, the Bengals finished with a winning record, going 9-8. This is a coach that brought the Bengals, along with Burrow, Chase, and others, to a Super Bowl appearance in a season that nobody expected it, right? They've been to multiple AFC championship games. But when you watch this team play right now, when you watch the Bengals play right now, are you watching them like they're a well-coached football team, or are you watching them like they're stale, like they need improvement, like maybe their play calling is a little vanilla? Perhaps their defense is extremely underwhelming. Or maybe the biggest reason Zack Taylor could be let go, the culture. There's a lot of ego in that Bengals locker room. They're saying things they probably shouldn't be saying. There's always seemingly a contract dispute. There feels like players that are not always in the right mind, in the right space to perform at the highest level. And those consistent issues continue to dwindle behind the scenes in Cincinnati, which I feel makes them an inconsistent product on Sundays week to week. So Zack Taylor, I've liked him. I've never been a huge fan, but I had to look at the resume and say, Zack Taylor's done his thing and he's done a good job. But if this continues, especially in terms of the culture, in terms of that locker room, and in terms of these personalities getting out of control, I think we could look at a new voice in Cincinnati to spark this football team. Coach Laxer says the Bengals need to have a better offensive line coach. They definitely had their issues on Sunday Night Football against the Giants. The Giants do have a good front seven, a good pass rush. I actually feel like their O-line has mostly been better this year, and that's been obvious in their production offensively, which has not been the problem. It's mostly been the defense. I understand Zack Taylor is an offensive coach, but he oversees the entire team. And I don't think it's necessarily a personnel issue on defense, maybe in the secondary, but there's another guy in Ohio that definitely has no personnel issues except for one major personnel issue, which makes it to the degree that I'm not even sure he belongs on this list. But you have to ask the question, and that is Kevin Stefanski of the Cleveland Browns. Kevin Stefanski is a two-time coach of the year. And Kevin Stefanski has been recognized as a great play caller, as a guy that can definitely scheme up a run game, has had one of the best O-lines in football since he's been there in Cleveland. And, you know, the success with Nick Chubb, the success with Baker, the success with Flacco, getting multiple quarterbacks to the playoffs and being able to win double-digit games with multiple quarterbacks. That's no small feat, in my opinion, in the NFL. But Stefanski has to be questioned because I think the biggest thing with Stefanski is how much control does he have over his locker room and his team right now in terms of he's backing Deshaun Watson. Every week he's coming out and he's saying Deshaun Watson is their guy. Deshaun Watson is their quarterback. Deshaun Watson is the guy under center. But Deshaun Watson continues to go out there and let down the team. week after week after week, and honestly be the reason this team isn't like 500 or competitive or maybe even a good football team. We saw what this team was with Joe Flacco last year. Deshaun Watson has been brutal since he's gotten there. And the major issue for Stefanski is he hasn't figured out what works with Watson, which I'm not sure anything does, but he hasn't figured that out offensively, and he's an offensive guy, which could lead ownership to make a switch at that offensive coordinator, offensive system type of spot, which is Stefanski. But then on top of that, if Stefanski goes down with the ship with Watson and they have a terrible record, there could be reason just based on results why he should be let go as well. Now, I do think that Watson is more on the hot seat than Stefanski here, but given his contract, they kind of have to make the Watson thing work as much as possible. So those two guys, the Browns, the Bengals, Taylor, and Stefanski are two coaches that deserve to be mentioned. Let's move to the bigger list, beginning with the one and only Dallas Cowboys. The biggest name, the one you're all waiting for, Mike McCarthy, is absolutely on the hot seat. But I will say that to some degree, I think he is the scapegoat, because Mike McCarthy, don't get me wrong, he's not Bill Belichick. He's not one of the greatest coaches of all time. He's not Andy Reid. He's no Bill Walsh, but he's not a terrible coach, in my opinion. And I think that is a product of, and an obvious based on like the results in Dallas. You look at, okay, 12 wins. Like, they keep going in the playoffs. They keep winning a ton of games in the regular season consistently. Like, Jason Garrett didn't do that. Previous regimes didn't do that in Dallas. I think McCarthy has actually been better for the Cowboys than previous coaches. That being said, is Mike McCarthy a phenomenal coach right now in the NFL? Maybe in 2010, maybe in 2011. Not now, okay? He's decent. He's average. But the problem is, average in Dallas, decent in Dallas, does not allow you to keep your job. Jerry Jones wants success. He wants playoff success. At least you think he does, right? Like, at least that's what I thought. I'm not exactly 100% sure. But I do know that he has to blame someone for the deficiencies of the Dallas Cowboys. And that will fall on Mike McCarthy, because he paid Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott's not going anywhere. And I'm not necessarily saying Dak is the problem. Dak, again, good. Is he great? I don't think so. But is he good? Yeah, I think so. The O-line is definitely underwhelming. Where does that come from? The front office, in my opinion. The defense, definitely underwhelming. Still can't stop the run. That's been an issue for a couple years. Where does that come from? The front office. The receiving core, maybe not as good outside of CeeDee Lamb as people would have thought. They decided to go with Rico Dowdle as their starting running back instead of Derrick Henry, which is an interesting choice. So they made their choice this offseason, and their choice was clearly, we're going to be deficient in these areas, and we are going to be probably taking a step back, because you compare the roster from last season, even just by the simple fact and feat that you had, you know, quality depth players like Dorrance Armstrong go out and sign with the Commanders. You had like a Stephon Gilmore on your roster as your second or third corner, and now you don't have that. Just the way they were building the roster last year made it known, and they had Tony Pollard, made it known that they were more of a contender last year. Their roster was deeper. Their roster was thicker. Their roster had more to it. This year, it feels like it's Dak, it's CeeDee Lamb. There's no running game. The run defense is atrocious. The pass defense is hit and miss. And without their pass rush, they really don't have a strength defensively with Parsons and Lawrence injured. And you can blame injuries all you want. But then you watch the coaching and you're like, Mike McCarthy, his offense is kind of like West Coast basic. There's no like real weekly like cool play or wide open players left and right. Like, you see these offenses across the NFL, whether it's Green Bay or San Francisco, you watch these offenses and you're like, there's just something that could be better on offense. Definitely the run game, but there's definitely something that's missing. There are weeks against the Steelers. I thought there were moments there where there was really good play calling. I thought he actually outcoached Mike Tomlin, but then there just feels like this team is getting blown out at home. No consistency. And I don't really know who to blame necessarily, but I think the biggest blame does go towards the head coach because this team really doesn't have an identity outside of like Dak throwing to number 88. So Bill Belichick to the Cowboys. I would say yes. I think the problem with that is that will Bill Belichick actually be given an opportunity by Jerry Jones? And would Bill Belichick want to work for Jerry Jones? The reason I say that is because of the amount of control that exists there. Bill Belichick is somebody that had his most success in New England because he ran the show. He drafted the players, right? He was the cook in the kitchen. He had the ingredients. He mixed the ingredients up into the pot and made a product on the football field, whether it was good or bad. It eventually got bad near the end. But Bill Belichick, what would he bring? I think he would bring execution. I think he would bring detail. I think he would bring great defense. And I think that would definitely help this football team. And I definitely think he would be an upgrade over Mike McCarthy. But would him and Jerry Jones be the right match? I'm not exactly sure. But I do think, and I've thought this for years, Jerry Jones needs to get himself a proven, but also like, I think, tougher coach. He tried that once upon a time with Bill Parcells. It didn't work out. But it feels like every one of these coaches he goes after is not exactly the Bill Belichick type. So we'll find out, man. What about Brian Daboll for the Giants? I do not have Brian Daboll on my list because when I watch the Giants, even last night, I watch the Giants and I say, their coaching is not the problem. I mean, defensively, they've gotten better and better this year. Offensively, I think they have good play calling, which comes from Brian Daboll. I think their scheme is solid. And over the first 3 years, you look at the success, right? So year one, they made the playoffs. They won a playoff game with a pretty below average roster. I mean, their number one receiver was Isaiah Hodgins. Okay, their offensive line was not extremely talented. Their defense was average, right? They made the playoffs. They won a playoff game because of coaching. Year two, they start, Danucci or who is it? The Italian quarterback. I forgot. The Ben DiNucci's the Cowboys guy. What's his name, bro? The Giants quarterback. I can't believe I forgot his name. But anyways, they're starting Tyrod Taylor. They don't have Daniel Jones. Their O-line is like a disaster. And sure, you could throw that on the coach. But I think you give a little bit of leeway after that playoff win, after that playoff appearance with a mediocre roster. And then year three right now, what are they? So they have, I think, 2 wins. And Daboll is somebody that I think he always manages the game correctly. He never really seems to have bad game management near the end of games. He always seems to give his team an opportunity. And Daniel Jones is really the guy that I feel like is more of the replaceable person here. Like they probably need to upgrade quarterback. Is Daniel Jones like, I think, a terrible quarterback? No, but he's not good. I wouldn't even put him in the average department. He's somewhere below average, but probably not absolutely terrible, right? So he needs to be replaced. They need to upgrade quarterback. There's a reason they maybe wanted to trade up for Drake May. And the defense has been playing better. I think the receiving cores look better. Wan'Dale Robinson, some of these pieces, Malik Neighbors, obviously. So we'll see with Daboll, but I think this team will continue to be pretty competitive. Let's get back to my list with the next name in the NFC East and continuing this NFC East trajectory here. Nick Sirianni of the Philadelphia Eagles. Nick Sirianni, honestly, is probably like the most unlikable coach. I don't know about in all of sports, but definitely the NFL. I mean, what coach sits there and just goes after, berates and chirps and mocks his own fans after they beat the Cleveland Browns, where they were 9.5 point favorites? After that game, they win by 4, right? 20-16. And Nick Sirianni is not sitting there. He's actually standing, trying to jump on things and yell at people. And like, what is that? What type of coach, what type of mature adult human does that? And then you watch the facial expressions. It's brutal. Like, he's so emotional. Relax. Like, why are you always so emotional? When they were great that one season, it worked because it's like, look at this guy. He's like an Eagles fan if he was a coach. But then every other moment of his career, it's been like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Does anyone even know what Nick Sirianni does? Like, that's a legitimate question people are asking. Like, what does Nick Sirianni actually do on Sundays? He doesn't call plays. He barely calls timeouts. He barely manages a game. He just says, go tush push on 4th and 1. Like, I could do that. I could do that. Come on, bro. Seriously, the defense has been cooked for like 2 years. And the offense, Jalen Hurts clearly have an issue since he lost Shane Steichen. I think the clear opinion here and the clear fact of the matter, it's not even an opinion. Nick Sirianni is a Shane Steichen product. He is. Absolutely. So Nick Sirianni, I think him being gone would be for the best. His team would be less erratic because they'd have less of an emotional, all over the place head coach. And they'd actually have a guy that knows what he's doing. This guy seems out of his element. Okay, so Nick Sirianni, definitely on the hot seat. Give Philly Ben Johnson. They win it all, says John. Ben Johnson's pretty sweet. Not going to lie about that. Not going to deny that. We do need to see how Ben Johnson is as a head coach, I will say. I think that just from a personality standpoint, we don't know much about Ben Johnson just because Dan Campbell is so much of an overwhelming personality. But Ben Johnson is a great offensive coach. He does have a lot of like Steichen to him in that manner. And you do wonder if the Eagles should have just kind of like boosted Shane Steichen to head coach. But I do think Ben Johnson will be a great coach. I will say, though, it's going to be interesting to see him removed from Dan Campbell and to see how similar they are. I'm very intrigued by that. As an Eagles fan, I'm fed up with his antics, says Philly 89. I would be so mad if I was an Eagles fan. Like this guy is, he's the worst. Like, this is the reason I don't like the Eagles right now. Like, I don't like the Eagles. I try not to dislike anybody, and I try not to go too overboard with love on anybody because I talk about every team. But the Eagles are kind of unlikable because of Nick Sirianni. It's really like that moment where they beat the Chiefs last year and he's like yelling at the Chiefs like they beat them in the Super Bowl. Like, what is this guy doing? What is this guy doing? And then he's got his buddy on the sidelines, like punching people on the Niners. Like, who manages this team? That's exactly my point. The front office had to bring in offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, not of his choosing. Like, that's already a huge red flag right there. So I think if Nick Sirianni was replaced by a mature human like Bill Belichick, who knew football, or Mike Vrabel, who knew football, anyone like that, even like right now, they'd probably be a better football team. So Nick Sirianni. Next up, Antonio Pierce. Antonio Pierce is on the hot seat. Guys, Antonio Pierce is a glorified hype man. Antonio Pierce is so far over his head. He's punting the ball on 4th and 1 on the plus 40-yard line like 2 times a week. Like, I'll tune into the Raiders and I'll see them punting the ball when they're down by 7, when they need a score, and they're punting the ball at the 40-yard line. So what is Antonio Pierce supposed to be? He's supposed to be a leader. He's supposed to be a motivator, but he's also supposed to be a game manager. He does not call plays. He does not run the defense. He does not really involve himself on game days in the schematical process. And I don't think he's very involved with that regardless, to be fair. I think he was elevated from basically a positional coach last year to becoming the head coach. And it was one of those things where it was like, we dislike and actually hate Josh McDaniels so much. Not me. I love Josh McDaniels. But they hate Josh McDaniels so much. And I'm not saying that Josh McDaniels didn't deserve to be fired. But as a Patriots fan, I'll never hate Josh McDaniels. Just throwing that out there. But Antonio Pierce, we want the opposite of Josh McDaniels. So what do we get? We get a guy that the players love. We get a guy that has a lot of emotion. We get a guy that has a lot of energy. We got a guy that has, I would argue, a presence to him. Like, I think I liked some of the things that Antonio Pierce brought to the table just in terms of presence. he does give off sort of a Dan Campbell sort of players coach type of vibe, which seems to work. But now you look at this season, and the team is not exactly the most well-tuned schematic team in football. I mean, they're very sort of average. I would say their defense is decent in that regard. Their offense is okay. It's not anything special. It's definitely below average. But their culture has now seen one of their best players ask for a trade within 4 weeks of an NFL season. Max Crosby is consistently just like, honestly, I'm kind of disappointed in Max Crosby. I understand his frustration, but I never thought he would go this far because I know he loves the Raiders. He's supposed to be the leader of the team, but he's consistently kind of throwing a fit, whether it be on the sideline or it be, to the media, kind of like basically calling out his coach, calling out the culture, calling out players on his team. Like, that shouldn't really be happening all that much. And that's happening consistently. So this guy, Antonio Pierce, is supposed to be a culture coach. He's supposed to be a leader of men. He's supposed to be the guy leading this team and keeping them in line. And he's none of that right now. Plus, he's making terrible in-game decisions, and he's not very good as a wizard scheming up things. So what does he really bring to the table? He's just completely over his head. He feels like he's a high school college coach, really, honestly. Winged says AP could go, but the real Getsy is a problem. I don't think Getsy is honestly that big of a problem. I think that the offense right now is just underwhelming overall. I think the quarterback position is one of the worst in football, which obviously hurts everything. So whether it be O'Connell or Minshew, I don't think it's good at quarterback. They've had injuries on the offensive line, and I think that maybe you could blame Getsy for the coordination of the offensive line, but I think the O-line coaching needs to be better as well. The run game has been pretty awful, which I think you might be able to put on Getsy. McDaniel's run game was certainly better, but I would say that Getsy is not a great offensive coordinator, and Antonio Pierce was the one who hired him, right? Like, Getsy was recognized as a below average offensive coordinator. I don't think he's awful. I don't think he's good. I think he's probably just like replaceable, right? He's not anything special. So I think that's where the frustration lies. But I think Antonio Pierce, if he were some great coach, he would probably be able to overcome that in some way, shape, or form. But even the thing that he's supposed to be good at, which I guess is defense and I guess is like management of the team, that has completely gone off the rails. Matt says Tom Brady needs to have a say with the Raiders. Mark is clueless. Yeah, well, we'll see how involved Tom Brady is with the team. I'm not exactly sure. He's obviously broadcasting as well. He's got many other ventures going on. I'm not sure, bro. Obviously, I would have Tom Brady probably just do an entire like diagnosis, like a hypothesis about the entire organization. I just let Tom Brady look at the entire roster and just study every single player on the roster. I'd let him go through the entire staff and talk about what he wants to talk about, and almost like treat him as somebody, just give all this analysis about our team and then allow us to kind of fix it. I think that's how I would have Tom Brady do it. I'd be like, okay, what? And then maybe ask him, because now he's looking at all these teams across the NFL, ask him which coaches stand out to him that are assistants that he thinks would be good to hire. Maybe some, guys that are maybe a little bit underrated in terms of players that they could bring in. Quarterbacks, definitely get his opinion on that. But I definitely think you could use Tom Brady in a variety of ways. DDT says AP is fine. He just doesn't have a quarterback. I disagree. I just don't see anything that Antonio Pierce does at a high level. I just disagree. I just don't see it with him. I really don't. Like, what does he bring? If you guys can answer me that question, what has he done well this year? Offense, defense, play callings, game plans, press conferences, fourth down decisions, game management. What has Antonio Pierce done well on a game day or a culture standpoint? His player wants to get traded 2 weeks into the year. He doesn't know who to start at quarterback. He keeps flip-flopping his quarterback. Like, I just don't see how that's good for your football team. Next up, we're going to talk about a former Philadelphia Eagle head coach who actually brought a Super Bowl ring to that city. So shout out to Eagles fans in the chat. Doug Pederson is definitely on the hot, burning hot seat. Doug Pederson AKA Mr. 9 wins, AKA one-hit wonder, AKA Nick Foles product. Just kidding. No. But Doug Pederson. I actually used to like Doug Pederson a lot as a coach in terms of, I thought he was a very good coach in Philadelphia. Obviously, had that one great season as a Super Bowl coach. Kind of did some things that were ahead of its time, just in terms of like aggressive decision making, like what Dan Campbell was doing or is doing now. Like Doug Pederson did in 2017, and it was very successful, and it led them to a Super Bowl, and it kind of brought that mentality to his team. I've always felt like Doug Pederson was good with his players and good with the locker room and got more out of less in some situations. But overall, I think there's just times for coaches in the NFL. And I think that Doug Pederson, as a good NFL coach, his time has passed. Very much like Mike McCarthy. I think that Doug Pederson, when you watch his offense, I think that it has no rhyme or reason. There's nothing that's tied together within his offense, from his run game to his pass game. His protection has been awful. He has failed to fix the offensive line for going on 3 years now. Trevor Lawrence, he was hired to make him a better player. In 2022, he appeared to be a better player. He appeared to be a guy that was on the ascension. Since then, he's been falling off a cliff, and he has not been able to turn that around. When you look at the defense, he has not been able to figure out consistency defensively, especially against the pass, no matter who the coordinator has been, right? And then you talk about the fourth down decisions, which has cost him games last year, late last season, this year, early this year against Miami, right? Like different games where it's just been like, what are you doing? What are you doing with these fourth down decisions where you're leading in games and it's 4th and 1 and you're at your own 30-yard line? Just punt the ball away, right? So there's just feels like Doug Pederson is losing control of his team. After every loss, he's going on his press conference and being like, we need to be better. We're okay. Our season's not lost. Like, we're still in it. Don't worry. Like, Doug Pederson, you should be worried, pal. You should be worried, Mr. Pederson, because I don't think they're happy with you in Jacksonville. Now, I want to say something. I think Trevor Lawrence is 100% overrated, overpaid, does not deserve the contract. But at least he has enough money to pay for all the shampoo that he'll ever need. So congratulations to Trevor Lawrence. Doug Pederson will probably end up in Kansas City or something like that, or maybe as an offensive coordinator somewhere. But I think he's probably still an average head coach in the NFL. I just think nothing has gone his way. But I will say that he is warranted to be fired because honestly, like, he hasn't fixed the problems that he was hired to address at a consistent rate. And look at the record. I mean, recently, you look at his actual track record, and he's pretty much been Mr. 9 wins. Like, he had one great season where he won a Super Bowl, but he's had like 9-8, 9-8, 9-8, 9-8. He's like Jeff Fisher when he went 7-9, like, or 8-8, like every season. That's Doug Pederson, except for 9-8. But then you also talk about just, the last like 10 games where they've won like 1 or 2 games out of their last 10 games. So, yeah. Jags have no structure, says Coach. They have no identity, no structure, I guess would be a way to put it. But yeah, they can't control any of these games. It feels like they're always chasing the game. Brian says, I'd take every single one of these coaches over Dennis Allen, which leads me to my next coach, Dennis Allen. Thank you for bringing it up. And by the way, guys, this is in no order per se, but Dennis Allen is 26-50 as an NFL head coach. He still has a job. I'm just going to let that sit. Dennis Allen, and I'll say it clearer this time, is 26 wins and 50 losses as a NFL head coach, and he still has a job. This is the same coach who wanted to bring the same quarterback that he consistently lost 12 games with to the city of New Orleans to help him win more than 4 games. Now, did this season start very well for the Saints? Yes, 2 wins. Since then, it's been absolutely atrocious. And I think most success from the fan base, they would argue, has been Clint Kubiak's doing. I think after the first two games definitely has been solved offensively a little bit more than previously, but I think the upgraded offensive coordinator has far outdone the success of Dennis Allen. And you look at Dennis Allen, and I actually think he's a good defensive coach, or at least he has been throughout a majority of his career. And I thought he was a great hire in New Orleans. He brought a lot of stability to the defense in New Orleans. But then you even argue, like you look at this season and where that defense has gone the last two games. They allowed 600 yards against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 600 yards and 51 points. Against a Chiefs stagnant offense, they looked pathetic, if not for turnovers. They were going to get a 40 burger on their head. Like, it was going to be bad. First two games, pretty good, but their pass rush, weak. Like, their run defense, not the standard. Like, if I were a head coach and I needed a DC, I'd probably go out and hire Dennis Allen if I, depending on the candidates. But I'd think about it because I think overall he's been a good defensive coordinator. But in terms as a head coach, he's never given that vibe. He's never given that presence to me. He's never given that leadership or command. And he's obviously extremely nonsensically just not equipped on offense. Like, he just does have no idea what's going on that side of the ball. So between his lack of, overall cohesion of understanding offense, defense, special teams, and basically being a defensive coordinator, glorified defensive coordinator, being a head coach, I just don't see why you wouldn't move on and try something different. There just needs to be something different here with this team. And I get that the talent is not great in New Orleans. Like, it's not bad. It's definitely better than the Patriots, but it's not great. Their O-line's been injured a lot. Carr got hurt. You had to start Spencer Rattler. The defense has had injuries, but every team has had that. And you look at the overall track record of the Saints with Dennis Allen as their coach. You look at Dennis Allen with the Raiders as their coach, and 26-50 at the end of the day is the record. Like, it speaks for itself, okay? Jude says a 35% win rate for a head coach is atrocious. Adam says, I wouldn't even want Dennis Allen to coach the Panthers. Okay. The Panthers are so bad, man. The Panthers are so bad. The Panthers, you know what the Panthers do? The Panthers make me look at them and they say, as a Patriots fan, I look at them and I say, we might be able to beat that team. That's what it makes me say when I watch the Panthers. DA is a far better coordinator, says Mr. Shug, than a head coach. I agree, 100%. I would definitely look at him as a defensive coordinator. And I just think there's guys like that. Like, I think Dennis Allen is more Spagnuolo than Andy Reid. Like, Spagnuolo was a great example. He's kind of like Dennis Allen. Like, horrible head coach. No success as a head coach. Glorified defensive coordinator. Becomes a defensive coordinator, and everywhere he's been, he's one of the best in the NFL. He's a reason they win Super Bowls. Dennis Allen is similar. I think there's and even Josh McDaniels is similar. Like, some guys are built to be coordinators. They don't have the personality to be head coach. They don't understand how to run an overall team, and they don't have the presence perhaps, or they just don't grasp all aspects of a team and what takes to be a head coach. So Dennis Allen is one of those guys. The last and final hot seat head coach that I want to mention, and you guys let me know in the comments if I failed to mention anybody, is Jonathan Gannon. Jonathan Gannon is currently 6-17 as the Arizona Cardinals head coach. His most recent outing, he got shellacked by over 20 in Green Bay. And I don't think Jonathan Gannon is necessarily an awful coach. The weird thing about him is that we don't have a lot of evidence whether or not he's good or bad, because the roster in Arizona has been borderline awful for most of the time he's been there. And even Kyler Murray was injured for half of the season that he was there. But you're currently watching the Cardinals product on the field consistently. And yeah, they fluked one off against the Niners, which again was a complete fluke. But they're 2-4. The offense, with all this talent, Petzing is the offensive coordinator. with all this talent, Marvin Harrison, high draft pick, Trey McBride, arguably the most talented tight end in the NFL, Kyler Murray, first overall pick, James Conner, good running back. Like even Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch can play. Like you've got all this talent. You should be putting up 20 points. The offense can't score. And then Jonathan Gannon is a defensive coach, and he's had like arguably the worst defense in the NFL for his first 2 seasons as a head coach. He never really, and this is maybe bias because he never even made me think he was a head coach in Philadelphia. He had like the most stacked defense in the league, and he basically played vanilla defense the entire year. And then he got absolutely torched on fire by the Kansas City Chiefs and had no answers for Juju in the Super Bowl, and had no answers for Andy Reid's weird motion plays. Like, are you kidding? Like, that got you hired? That reminds me of when Matt Patricia got hired after they lost to the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and they allowed a grand total of 0 punts in that game, and then he got hired by the Lions. I understand that the hiring process it was actually previous to the Super Bowl, like right before, but then you watch those performances in the Super Bowl, you see what happens after that Super Bowl with that team, and you're like, well, I'm shocked that this guy is actually not that good of a coach. So overall, 6-17 is going to put anyone on the hot seat. Anybody on the hot seat. And I understand that Arizona is rebuilding, retooling, and they're going slow, super slow, but you got to show me something. Like, you got to show me anything. How long are we just going to drag this out with Kyler Murray making all this money? And maybe Kyler Murray deserves more of the blame, but he got the big contract, baby, so he's not really going anywhere, right? So I don't know. I just think maybe an offensive coach could do something for this team. Maybe a different mentality as the head coach could do something for this team. Maybe a more proven guy, bring him in, could do something, reestablish this football team. Just feels like there's nothing about this team that really gets me excited. Nothing about this team that has an identity. So I don't know, man. I don't know about Jonathan Gannon. I just don't. Thoughts on Sean McDermott. I actually wanted to put him in this video, but producer Ian put him off the honorable mention list, which is fine. But Sean McDermott, I got my eye on you, Sean McDermott. You better do something, bro. In the playoffs, Sean, not in the regular season, because you've got Josh Allen. You're going to win 10 games. It doesn't even matter. You're probably going to lose tonight, but see, this is the problem with McDermott. McDermott probably should have been fired like 2 years ago. But the thing is, like, you can't fire a coach that much. It's hard to fire a coach when you're the Bills and you win like 11 games a year. And before that, you were rolling out JP Lossman for 6 wins a year, and you couldn't win a game. But McDermott brought you to the playoffs. He won you some playoff games. He got your feet wet a little bit, right? Like, he got you in the conversation as a good team, a good culture. And I think Sean McDermott's a good defensive coach overall. My problem with McDermott is he's a defensive coach that every single time they play in the playoffs, his defense absolutely sucks. And then his time management is even worse. I mean, how many seconds was it that they allowed the Chiefs to beat? Like 13? What was it? How does that happen? So, I mean, he basically cost his franchise a Super Bowl, and then he can never stop the Chiefs. Bring someone else in there. Like, really? And then you constantly have to flip the offensive coordinator. So, I don't know. McDermott is he's like a guy that gets you to the dance, but he can't win you the thing, man. He can't win you the thing right now. So, I think McDermott. Hayden says, I'm a Pats fan. I like Mayo, but thoughts on him? I like Mayo. I have a obvious emotional tie to Mayo because he was a player for this team. So I love the player, but I think if we're being objective he was also on the dishonorable mention list. If we're being objective, Gerard Mayo has not been great this year. I think he had a good game against the Bengals. Defense showed up, but if you look at it and you compare the defense last year to this year, there were injuries for both of these defenses. Last year's defense was significantly better than this year's defense. And Mayo is the defensive head coach. And Bill Belichick was the only guy that left, really. Well, Steve Belichick, too, who's in Washington. But just to be fair, I think that Mayo has underwhelmed on his side of the ball. I think that offensively, they're a disaster. And if not for Drake May being a promising shining light of this organization, I think there would be nothing to look forward to. There's nothing that this team does well. So I think it's open for discussion. We have to see how the season ends. But if you have a chance to pair a young, gifted offensive coach with Drake May and his skill set, how do you ignore that if you're Robert Kraft? And I think my problem and my fear with Robert Kraft is that he is very loyal. And I don't see him making a decision 1 year and be willing to let that go within 1 year. That's my problem. And that's why I don't think he's actually on the hot seat. But I think that he is not proving that he's a good coach yet. I'm not sure about that. Dallas married to Dak now, so the next head coach has to be somebody Jerry thinks can fix him. I don't necessarily think Dak needs fixing. I think he just is what he is. He's a good quarterback, but not a great quarterback. I do think that there's a chance that an offensive coach could come in and elevate him through scheme. But yes, Dak had a bad game against Detroit. I don't think that's what he is necessarily. I think he's just good. But the thing is that Dak has never had a great coach. Like, people fail to mention this. Dak has never had a great coach. And Dak to me is like, Dak would win a lot more in the playoffs if he had Kyle Shanahan, if he had Sean McVay, right? Like, Matthew Stafford never won a playoff game until he had Sean McVay, right? Matthew Stafford is better than Dak. Matthew Stafford is a Hall of Fame talent. He never won a playoff game until he got to Sean McVay. Like, so to me, I think Dak is a good player. But the problem is that Jerry Jones has always had him with below average coaches. They've had good rosters. Now, does Dak deserve some of the blame because he's had really good rosters around him? Yes. Like, he should be able, if he's really great and this elite player that he's paid to be, which, again, I don't agree with the contract. So this is where kind of we separate. But should he be able to elevate players around him if he is this great, highly paid player? Yes. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, he is what he is. You're not going to fix him. He just is. He's good. He's not great. Okay? So that's it, guys. The hot seat. There's definitely a lot of guys that deserve to be on the hot seat. We're going to have to make more room potentially next week, but we'll see who's fired next. My guess would probably be Doug Pederson after Drake May layeth the smackdown on him in London. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you. Follow me on BR for weekly Monday morning reactions. You can also subscribe over on YouTube, The Bottom Line View. It's Mitch. Deuces.